There are moments in life that echo forever, soft whispers of choices we wish we could erase. I still remember that night, the scent of antiseptic and coffee mixing with something heavier, something like guilt. The hospital was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums through your veins and makes you aware of every heartbeat. I can still hear the beeping monitors, the distant footsteps, and my own trembling breath as I did something I can never take back. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to appreciate every one of you watching. To my returning viewers, thank you for always being here. To my new viewers, I am so glad you found this channel. I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button, because your support is the fuel that keeps stories like this alive. Do not forget to share your thoughts in the comments below, your voices matter more than you know. Now, let me tell you what really happened after my night shift at the hospital. I was 34, a registered nurse at St. Andrew's Medical Center in Virginia. Most people would describe me as kind, calm, and devoted. But what they did not know was that I was also lonely, painfully, quietly lonely. My husband, Ryan, worked as a police officer. Our schedules were opposite, and our marriage had begun to feel like two strangers living under the same roof. When he left for work, I was coming home. When I went to bed, he was heading out the door. Our love had become a ghost, still there, but barely breathing. Night shifts have a way of numbing you. You get used to suffering, to silence, to watching people fade away. But that night felt different. The ward was unusually still. Only a few patients remained, older men, mostly veterans, their eyes tired, their stories unspoken. One of them, Mr. Harris, was in his late 50s, recovering from surgery. Every night, he would stare at the ceiling, his eyes glassy, as if searching for something that would never return. I remember walking into his room with his medication. He smiled weakly and said, "You remind me of my wife. She used to sit by my bed like that." His words pierced something inside me. I had not heard anyone speak of love like that in years. There was a tenderness in his voice that made my heart ache. As I adjusted his blanket, he reached out and held my hand. It was such a simple gesture, yet it felt like electricity. His fingers were cold, fragile, desperate for warmth. I did not pull away. I told myself it was compassion, the human need to comfort another soul. But deep down, it was something else. It was the hunger for connection I had been denying for far too long. When the ward lights dimmed and the hospital quieted even more, I visited another room, Mr. Coleman. He was younger, around 40, his wife had stopped visiting weeks ago. He always told me stories about their happier days, but each night his eyes sank deeper into sorrow. That night, he was crying silently. I sat by his bed, placed my hand over his, and whispered that everything would be all right. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You are the only one who still talks to me." Something inside me broke. I leaned closer, brushed his hair away, and before I realized it, the line between care and craving had disappeared. I told myself it was empathy. I told myself that people like them needed love, touch, warmth, anything to remind them they were still human. But the truth was darker. I needed it too. By dawn, the weight of my actions had settled deep within me. The corridors that once felt safe now felt like a prison. Every sound echoed my shame. The patients I had comforted looked at me differently, not with gratitude, but with a quiet understanding that something forbidden had happened between us. When I stepped outside, the cold morning air hit my face like punishment. The city was waking up, and I was falling apart. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I walked into our house, saw Ryan's uniform hanging by the door, and nearly collapsed under the guilt. He was asleep in our bedroom, his arm draped across the empty side of the bed, my side. I stood there, staring at the man I once loved so deeply, and for the first time in years, I realized just how far I had drifted. I had betrayed not just him, but the very oath I had sworn as a nurse. That morning, as sunlight broke through the curtains, I sat at the edge of the bed and whispered to myself, "What have I done?" I thought I was offering comfort. I thought I was healing loneliness. But in truth, I had opened a wound that could never close again. And that was only the beginning. I tried to live as if that night had never happened. I returned to my usual routine, checking vitals, changing linens, offering smiles that never quite reached my eyes. But inside, something had shifted forever. I carried the guilt like a heartbeat. It followed me into every room, every silence, every stolen glance. At first, I thought I could bury it beneath my professionalism. I told myself it was a mistake, a fleeting moment of weakness, something that would fade with time. But guilt has a way of breathing, it grows, it speaks, and soon, it begins to scream. Ryan began to notice the change in me. He would come home from work and find me staring at nothing, my mind miles away. I stopped laughing at his jokes. I stopped asking how his day went. The truth is, every time I looked at him, I saw my sin reflected in his innocence. He would sometimes touch my hand, hoping to rekindle something, but I would flinch, just slightly, but enough for him to feel it. The space between us grew larger, colder, and filled with unspoken questions. One night, he looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Claire, you have been somewhere else lately. You can tell me anything, you know that, right?" I forced a smile. "I am just tired, Ryan. Work has been draining." He nodded slowly, but his eyes said he did not believe me. The hospital became my escape and my torment. Every hallway reminded me of what I had done. Every patient's face mirrored my shame. Mr. Coleman, the man I had crossed the line with, was discharged 2 weeks later. When he left, he said softly, "Thank you, for everything." I smiled, pretending not to understand what he meant. But the weight of his gaze lingered long after he was gone. Months passed, and I began to rebuild my mask. Ryan and I started therapy, trying to piece together what we had lost. I told myself I would never repeat my mistake. But as fate would have it, some sins do not stay buried. It happened on a Saturday morning. Ryan was off duty, enjoying his first weekend in weeks. We were in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, expecting a delivery. When I opened the door, my heart froze. Standing there, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, was Mr. Coleman. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Claire," he said with a nervous smile, "I was in the area. I just wanted to thank you again for everything you did for me in the hospital. You were more than kind." Ryan's voice echoed from behind me. "Who is it, Claire?" I turned, my throat tightening. "It is a former patient." Ryan came to the door, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. "You look familiar," he said to Mr. Coleman. Mr. Coleman nodded, his eyes flickering between us. "She took care of me after my surgery. She was wonderful." Ryan smiled politely. "My wife is one of the best nurses out there." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Mr. Coleman hesitated, then said softly, "She really went above and beyond for me." The look in his eyes was not gratitude. It was remembrance. Ryan's expression changed, barely, but I saw it. His jaw tightened. His hand dropped from my shoulder. "Thank you for stopping by," Ryan said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "But my wife needs to rest before her next shift." Mr. Coleman nodded, clearly sensing the tension, and handed me the flowers. "Take care, Claire." As soon as the door closed, the silence exploded between us. Ryan stared at me, his eyes dark with suspicion. "Above and beyond?" he asked quietly. I tried to speak, but my lips trembled. "It is not what you think." He stepped closer. "Then tell me what I should think." Tears welled in my eyes. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. "I made a mistake, Ryan. I was lonely, I was tired, and I—" "Stop," he said sharply. "Just stop." He walked away, his hands gripping his head, pacing across the kitchen. You cheated on me? At your job? With your patients?" The shame hit me like a wave. I could not lie anymore. Yes, I whispered. I did. He turned to me slowly, disbelief written all over his face. My God, Claire. Do you even understand what that means? You took vows, to me, to your profession, and you threw them away like they meant nothing. I tried to reach for him, but he stepped back. His eyes were filled with pain and disgust. You risked everything, he said. Your job, your marriage, your dignity. For what? My voice broke as I cried. I just wanted to feel something again. I wanted to remember what it was like to be wanted. He looked at me for a long time, his face hardening with every second. Then I hope it was worth it. He left that night. The days that followed were unbearable. Ryan refused to answer my calls. He packed his things and stayed with his brother. I kept going to work, but whispers started spreading around the hospital. Someone had seen Mr. Coleman's visit. Rumors grew like wildfire. My supervisor called me into her office. Claire, she said gently, there are concerns about your conduct with a former patient. We will have to investigate. I felt my world collapsing. My career. The one thing I had built my entire life around was hanging by a thread. At night, I would sit on the bathroom floor, crying until I could not anymore. I had lost my husband, my peace, and now possibly my profession. One evening, I drove to the pier where Ryan and I had our first date. I sat there, staring at the water, replaying every moment that led me here. Compassion had turned into temptation. Empathy had turned into betrayal. And my attempt to heal others had destroyed myself. The investigation began. I was placed on administrative leave. Ryan filed for separation. The house felt empty, and every corner whispered his name. I kept hoping he would walk through the door, that he would forgive me, that somehow, love could survive what I had done. But deep down, I knew some wounds run too deep to heal. As I sat alone in that quiet house, the weight of everything I had lost became unbearable. My heart ached not just for Ryan, but for the version of myself that no longer existed, the woman who once believed compassion could never destroy her. But life was not done teaching me lessons. The worst was yet to come. There is a silence that comes after destruction. It is not peaceful. It is haunting. It lingers in your chest, reminding you that you have shattered something sacred and there is no way to piece it back together again. That was the silence that filled my home after Ryan left. It followed me into every room, wrapped around me like a punishment I could not escape. The hospital board had launched a full investigation. Every question they asked felt like a knife turning inside my heart. They wanted details, dates, reasons. They wanted to understand how someone like me, a nurse praised for compassion, had crossed the line so far that she could never return. I remember sitting in that cold office, my hands trembling as I tried to explain something that had no justification. I spoke of loneliness, of exhaustion, of empathy that had turned to temptation. I wanted them to see that I had not set out to harm anyone. I had only wanted to heal. But they did not see a broken woman trying to make sense of her pain. They saw a professional who had betrayed her oath and broken the trust that held her world together. I was suspended indefinitely, pending a final review. The hospital badge that once made me proud now sat in a drawer, like a symbol of everything I had lost. Ryan came by once, to collect the rest of his things. He did not say much. He looked around our living room, at the framed wedding photo on the wall, and shook his head softly. You destroyed everything we built, he said quietly. I loved you more than anyone ever could, but you chose to love the emptiness instead. I wanted to tell him that I still loved him. I wanted to fall to my knees and beg him to stay. But I could see it in his eyes, the man who once looked at me with devotion now saw only a stranger. When he walked out, I knew it was the last time I would ever see him. The months that followed were a blur of depression and self-reflection. I stopped answering calls from friends. I stopped going out. My world became smaller, darker, quieter. The only sound that kept me company was the ticking of the clock, each second reminding me of what I could never undo. One night, I received a letter from the hospital board. They had reached their decision. I opened it with shaking hands. My nursing license was revoked. Just like that, the career I had built for over a decade was gone. I sat on the floor, the letter in my hand, tears streaming down my face. It felt like my life had ended, not with an explosion, but with the slow, painful collapse of everything I had once been. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Eventually, I moved out of the house Ryan and I had shared. I found a small apartment by the edge of town. I started volunteering at a local community shelter, trying to find some meaning in what was left of me. That was where I began to understand something I had been too blind to see before. Sometimes, when we try to heal others, we are really trying to fill the emptiness inside ourselves. Compassion without boundaries can become dangerous. Love without direction can destroy more than it saves. At the shelter, I met people who had lost everything: addicts, abandoned mothers, broken veterans. I listened to their stories, and for the first time in a long while, I did not try to fix them. I just listened. Because sometimes, that is all a soul really needs: not touch, not sympathy, just someone willing to hear the pain without judgment. Years have passed since that night shift at St. Andrew's. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see the hospital corridors, the quiet lights, the faces of the men I tried to comfort. I wonder if they ever think of me, not as their nurse, but as the woman who blurred the line between mercy and need. I still dream of Ryan. In those dreams, we are back at the pier where we once laughed under the stars, before everything went wrong. But when I wake, I remember the truth. Some choices carve scars so deep that even time cannot heal them. I tell my story now, not to seek forgiveness, but to remind others that compassion must have limits. Empathy without restraint is not love, it is self-destruction. To everyone listening right now, thank you. Your time, your hearts, your support, they are what keep this channel alive. Each story I tell is a piece of real pain turned into purpose. And if my words have reached you tonight, if they have made you think, or reflect, or even shed a tear, then please, take a moment to subscribe. It may seem small, but your support is the heartbeat that keeps this channel alive. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your words matter. Someone out there might need to hear what you have to say. Before I go, I want to leave you with a question, one that has haunted me for years. If showing love to someone lonely meant betraying someone who trusted you, would you call it compassion, or would you call it sin?